Hello everybody, today we're going to talk about SQL Server Unit Testing and some insights into SSDT. So before we start, who's heard of SQL Server Unit Testing within Visual Studio? Anybody? Good. Anybody use it in anger? Good. Right. In this session we're going to cover the prerequisites, so what we need to get things running, the features within SQL Server Unit Testing, SQL Server test configuration, so that's like, you know, what connections to use, do I deploy the database, etc, etc. Then we're going to talk about the test script itself, the test conditions, setting up data, turning it down, some pros and cons, a demo, and using Rake if we've got time. So that's the course coverage. So what we need, okay, we need Visual Studio 2012 with update 4. We need the latest version of SQL Server Data Tools, and for Rake we need Ruby installer. For the sake of this presentation I was using version 1.93. Okay, so features. So unit test projects are created by a template, and they're like any other Visual Studio project. When it's built, it creates a DLL which encapsulates all the tests in the project. When it's accompanied by an app.config file, it can be ported to any environment and configured through any test runner that accepts MS test compiled DLLs. Okay, so you've also got a test explorer, which is a UI. It's built into Visual Studio. It's quite clean and very user friendly. I can show you that now if you like. So the test explorer looks a bit like that. And I'll set the demo up so everything fails, but you know, it's quite straightforward. You can run individual tests, you can debug them if you like, but we'll get onto that later.
So that's just MS test?
That's MS test, yeah. So it doesn't run for NUnit, it's just MS test compiled DLLs. Obviously we've got the solution on the side there, but I'll talk about all this later. Okay, so we've also got a UI for your test conditions. So it makes short work of writing most unit tests, and they're quite straightforward and easily to understand because everything is written in SQL. Okay, so like I said, all initialization scripts, cleanup, pre, post, and the scripts themselves are all written in SQL, so it makes a good fit for all SQL developers and application developers alike. Okay, testing doesn't require any additional objects to deployed in the database like some other SQL Server testing frameworks like T-SQL-T, etc. And tests can live alongside other projects, so whether you've got C# projects, DB projects, DT projects, they all can sit in one solution, and it's good for you know, keeping everything together, so you know you can put your tests with your database, with your application, so it's all in one place. Okay. So the test configuration dialog looks something like this. Okay, so you've got your database connections, so that's your primary connection, so you can configure it in a way where you've got a secondary connection. Your secondary connection is where you can create all your data, your setups, your teardowns, your pre and post. If that's not selected, it uses one. So sometimes you might want to test them in isolation, creating your data separate from your test. Unless that's ticked there, it doesn't work. Okay. So if you've got a database project configured in your solution, you can also deploy it by ticking that box. So when you hit F5 to run your tests, it will go to the configured database project, deploy it for you, with whatever's configured in the primary connection.
Can I just ask a question about
Yeah.
that? So, considering we're speaking about SQL Server testing rather than, say, ETL testing,
Yeah.
it's probably not good practice to do it, but how do we deal with kind of cross-database dependencies when we're setting up big configuration?
Okay, so you either can do it via link servers.
Right.
So you can create a 4-part name. You can create a symlink between objects. So you can create a variable that really isn't. It's just a symlink.
So you'd have a primary configuration, but then for other databases you have to use a 4-part configuration. For example.
Yes, that's where you do it. If it went cross server.
Yeah,
if it went
4-part.
Yeah, if it went cross database, you'd have to use the third part
Sure.
or a symlink.
Yeah.
So all this configuration is written in an app config file, which when the project compiled gets bundled with it. So it means like you can run reg through it and change the configuration if you moved environments. So you can port your tests through pipelines. So it's really good for when moving environments. Okay, so the test script itself, which is this bit here. As you can see, you write your select statements. Each select is a condition, and you can see that there. Okay, but I'll get onto the conditions later. This is where the actual assertions occur. As mentioned earlier, they're all written in SQL. Therefore, to be able to test, we must write a select statement and then assert with a test condition, if that makes sense. So every select statement accumulates a result set, and as part of the test condition, you point your test condition at a result set from the test script. So you've got to keep them in order. I'll go through that later, but basically there's a slight nag to it. If you get your order of your selects wrong, it could knock all your tests off, but I'll show you what I mean later. So each test script has a corresponding pre and post test script, which can be used for data setup or teardown. So it's where you set your state for your test. So you can create some data, you can then roll it back or tear it down. So each test is a unit. Okay. So these are your test conditions, and they are, you configure your result set number. So result set 1 is correlates to your first record set. Your result configures to your second record set. So you can see that's how you set up your test conditions, by adding them to the list and then configuring them based on the select statement.
Is it fair to say that when you're setting up these tests, it's good practice to annotate the actual test conditions, so that when you've got several, it's easy to see where you're.
So you can put living documentation on here. You can put comments on here. It's just like any other T-SQL script. You can even print out if you wanted, because, like I said, test conditions are measured with a select statement. So I tend not to use the data checksum. Basically, it fails if the checksum of the result set returned from SQL doesn't match the expected checksum. So basically, say if you're developing a stored procedure and you want to make a slight change to it, you can capture the checksum before the change, make your change, make sure that the result set is exactly the same. It's done in some hash code. I tend not to use it because it could be quite buggy. An empty result set. Okay, so if the select statement that you're asserting is empty, then that's good. If it's populated, it will fail. So the execution time. So it's a good one to say. It's a good one to set at the end of all tests, to say that a stored procedure can't run for at least a second or 2 or 3. The default is 30 seconds. So at the end of all your tests, you could then say, okay, if I execute this function, store procedure, it must return in a given number of seconds. So expected schema, I don't really use that. Basically, you point it at a table, and when you select from the table, it must be exact. I tend not to use it. Tend not to use that one. So an inconclusive test. So as soon as you create a test class, it creates an inconclusive test, and it shows as ignored within the test runner. It's just a default. I don't know why you would use it in real life. You just remove it. So a non-empty result set is what I use the most. So you can run a select statement with a predicate, and it must return a result set, and that's what it's saying. If it's empty, it will fail. So I've used row count quite a lot as well. So if you counted the number of rows coming from a stored procedure, then it must expect whatever you configure. And a scalar value is it returns one. It measures one result set. So a non-empty result set, you can count the columns and you can have many permutations, whereas a scalar value can only assert the first column, doesn't go anymore because it's one value. Has anyone got any questions around that?
So you say the first column, but presumably you can test the values in all the columns.
You
only ever test
you
the value
can.
in the first column.
You only can test with a scalar value. You only can test the value in the first column.
So that means if you want to test other columns, you just have to tweak the test so that the first column is the
you
one
can
you
have
want
many
to test.
scalar values, but in that instance, I would use a non-empty result set, because you then can count the rows, you can count the columns, and you can count the result set as well. So I tend to use a non-empty result set because that's the most exact. Okay, so talked about data setup briefly. This gives you the ability to set up all tests with data in a particular state, and it's done with the common script, which is the test, which is the initialized script. That is the first thing that ever gets run, and I can show you. So going back to the test itself, it's on the common scripts and it's the initialized script. So it kind of says, okay, I want to set the state of all tests in this particular item, and for each item I've also got a pre-test, puts the data in it, but then each script can run individually. So you've got the ability to set up all tests with a particular state from one global initialized script. You've also got the ability to set up individual tests using the pre-test script within each test. So this is ideal for when testing scenarios where data needs to be in a given state. Each script, so that's the common scripts, pre and post and test, runs in a new session. So you can't do begin transaction, rollback transaction. If you want that kind of behavior, you've got to put it all in one script, because it's a different session.
Can you run them in parallel?
Parallel test, yeah, you can have a test set up. So it's a new item as part of the project. You can run them in order. You can order your tests. You can run tests in parallel, but that's part of MS Test. So it's MS Test setup.
But if you do them in parallel, do you risk having problems with data setup and teardown?
Yeah.
Something might be deleting data that's...
You would, yeah. So
another.
In that instance, you would create global temporary tables with different names per parallel task. So
it's fair to say our practice is to keep each item independent.
Independent, yeah.
It's probably just easier that way. If you need to do something from the previous test, put it in the pre-test.
Yeah. Okay, so is everybody clear what data setup is? Okay, we've also got the opposite to that, which is the teardown. This gives the ability to return the database back to its original state before testing. Before testing was done. This is done with a global cleanup script. Now, you've got to write the piece of SQL yourself to return it back, but it gives you the opportunity to if you ever want to. So it doesn't actually do it. You've also got the ability to return the data to its original state before individual tests. So each test is independent. So each test has its pre and post test. So you can return the state of a test back to its original state using the post test script. And they're ideal for when testing scenarios where data needs to be in a given state per test. And it's the same thing. Each script runs in a new connection or session, and you've also got access to the test conditions within each data setup and data teardown scripts.
So within each item of a test,
yeah,
you've got the pre-test, the test, and the post-test.
Yeah.
Could I wrap all those three in a transaction?
Not off the shelf. You can get into the C# under the hood.
Yeah.
So when you initialize the class, you can create a transaction scope object and roll it back. But that's not conventional.
Is it better practice when you're tearing down then to use statements to do?
Yeah, in that instance, however, you don't have to use the pre and post scripts. No. They're there for you if you need them. If you want the data to be returned exactly as it was before you started, you do it in one script.
So you could just use the test, but then use transactions within that single test.
And that would work.
Yeah.
You can't do it in SSAS though.
No, you can't do it in SSAS. This is the SQL server, so it's stored procedures.
Yeah. So I've got some pros and cons. Pros, it's written in Visual Studio, and it sits close to relating projects. You get the added benefit of add-ons such as Redgate, Prompt, Visual SVN, and Resharper. So you can use Redgate, Prompt within SSDT. All tests are written in SQL, so there's not much of a culture change for SQL devs alike. There's going to be future support for project templates, so that's promised by Microsoft. So there's improved UI and designers, so it makes it easier because you've got like a WYSIWYG user interface. It's really easy and simple to use. And another pro is that you don't need to add objects to the database to make this work. So cons, like you've brushed upon, Paul, you're unable to set up and tear down scripts within a transaction for rolling data back to its original state. I think that's where it's flawed, I think, a little bit.
Yeah.
But this can be done only in the test script. Okay. Test projects are not so comfortable for DB devs. We like Management Studio. It's a bit of a culture change for that. Ordering of each individual test condition can be tedious. So say if you've got, 10 select statements, each with 10 conditions, and you put one in the middle, you've got to then manually order each test correctly because they'll fall out of sync. And it's not suitable for load testing without extensive coding. So there's nothing to say we can't use the XP command shell executable to kick off JMeter or any other profiling tools. So that's it. I'm going to show you a demo. So I've set ourselves two requirements. So we must create a store procedure to return some data, some product, and we must create a store procedure to get some products. Simple as that. So let's see what we can do. This is where we are. We're in Visual Studio at the minute. I've written some tests already, make the presentation a bit more smoother. Okay, so first of all, we're going to test that the schema is set up exactly like that. So we've got a product table, we've got a primary key, that's an int, we've got a name, which is a varchar, we've got a quantity, which is an int, price is money, and we've got deleted as a bit. Okay, so as you can see, each one of them creates a select statement. Yeah, so I've got, I think there's 6 there. So the first select statement, does the schema exist? And I'm using a scalar value because I'm returning one value.
Why not use non-empty results then?
I could do.
Is there any, what would you have best to use?
If I was, it's horses for courses really,
yeah.
So I tend to use scalar value because there's less.
There's more configuration.
Yeah, it could be exact.
So this list of things down at the bottom, the
Yeah.
conditions,
Yes.
how do they map to what we're looking at in the main
Okay,
thing?
so if you click properties on each, so how you add them, you add them by scalar value, you add 1, it goes to the end. Okay, it defaults to result set 1. So you change your result set to 7, you've got to know that where you are, just like I was saying. You've got to say if you was expected 1. So when you go down to result set 7, that's all you do.
Right.
And you can see there that result set 7 must return 1 for column 1
Right.
and row 1.
So the conditions relate to the statements. There's one
Yes,
condition
yeah.
for each statement.
There's one
Okay.
condition for each statement, yes, that's exactly right. And say if I was to chuck a select statement in here, it would throw everything else off.
Right.
So that's the only downfall to it.
So you could probably annotate in,
Yeah.
in the select statement
Of course you
the
can.
actual name of the test condition to
Yeah.
say
So
if you've
deleted
got 10 or 12, it becomes easier just to
is
Age
deleted.
As well.
yeah, or number them as well.
But then the same thing though, if you put one in between 3 and 4, you've got to then do
Yeah, I
number
wouldn't
1.
recommend numbering because
No.
numbering you have to
You
manually
always-
change the
Every
numbers
time,
every time.
every
Yeah.
time.
Names are better.
So
how do you,
1A, 1B.
how do you link the name with that assertion? Can you show
you gotta
Yeah,
write
so
it.
You just have to know.
You
that
just
they're
have
in
to
that
know.
order.
You just
So
have to know.
the
You can move
conditions-
them around, but it makes sense for them to go down with the select statement.
So that's why this guy was saying, and if you put a comment above each one, then you'll know which condition relates to which select statement.
So in the property, you still use the index number to associate with that. So take that price for example.
Yeah,
is
so
that
if
the
I
name?
so the price is there. I've
Yeah.
named it price, so
Okay.
I know where it is on the test script.
But on the
And
property
if-
side, you still have to use that index number to count.
Which
Yeah.
one? The result
That-
set
Result
number.
set number,
Yeah, which are right. So
I don't like.
yeah. So
Because
if you
the
do
name
move,
of it, wouldn't it?
so if you do add
Yeah.
one
Yeah, yeah.
in the middle, you've got to go through each one of them and move them down.
Yeah, it'd be better if you could like lock the name to it rather
Yeah.
than whatever sits on the
Yeah.
page.
If that can be indexed by name rather than by.
So I've utilised the common scripts here to make sure I'm nothing in the table, and I've done the same for when I finish. So I'll return the database into a state before I started testing. So each test may or may not set up data. I'll have to double check. No. So it's not required for you to do that. It just gives you the ability to. So if I want to get a product, I'm asserting with two select statements, making use of scalar value. But I'm also making use of inserting some data here, and I've got a test condition in my pre-script. So you can do if you want to. It just ensures your data's set up for the test. You don't have to do that. It's good practice to do. So that's pretty much saying, okay, put the result set of that into a table and select it out later. And it's the same for insert as well. So double checking that you get the data out. Okay, so if we was to run all these now, okay, they're all going to fail. Okay. I'm not connected to the network. Yeah, it's all going to fail. So what I'll do is I'll just deploy it. I'll insert these objects. And then they'll all pass. See down here, the database has been deployed. For all these, it should all pass. Boom. So, has anybody got any questions around any of this?
So would you recommend writing the tests first?
Yes, I would.
Or would you writing your code and then trying to test it?
So that's no, I always take TDD seriously. Yeah, always. So I always write the test first because you can base them on requirements from the business, and you know what your deliverables are.
Yeah.
So then you will go off and write a table, you go off and write a store procedure, and hopefully everything should go green.
So you're also using the test to prescribe the structure of a particular table.
Yeah.
You're saying it should have these columns and there should be these data types.
Exactly. So
in a way you're documenting as well. You're documenting the structure of
all the
table.
way through.
Yeah.
You can even add your relationships here if there was any. So any foreign keys, any constraints, anything like that's related to the table, you can put in your schema setup.
And when you just deployed, then what does that actually mean? What was the effect of that?
Okay, so we're going into SSDT realms now, which I didn't really want to, but basically it creates a script and it deployed a few objects into the database which was configured in this published file, and it just makes the offline representation of the database, which is that, and the online representation the same. So whether that updates, deletes, drops, alters, whatever, it'll just make the database look exactly the same.
Oh, right, yeah.
Just so I can test.
Yeah.
So, anyone got any questions about that? No, cool. Alright. So, as SQL Server testing is done within Visual Studio and it utilises MS Test under the hood, we can integrate the tests into automated pipelines using a lot of Rake, a lot of Ruby, and today we have 10 DB pipelines going into CI and QA, and each pipeline has its own individual tests. Roughly we've got about 100 tests in the LateRooms database alone, and these are our pipelines, and you can see that if we look at the tests that we've written, they'll get automatically deployed by the pipeline and ran. You can see there. So each test will have many conditions. So that's where we are today, and we've got quite a few pipelines. As you can see, we've got each pipeline's got its own test section. The tests could be included in pipeline, and for LateRooms alone, we've got all them tests. Each test has many test conditions, and like you can see, we've got quite a lot of pipelines there, quite a lot of tests.
So that number 0 in the middle of the kind of the horseshoe, does that mean 0 failures?
0 failures, everything's green. So we'll have a look at this, what's running at the minute. It's auto distribution is testing at the minute. So you can see it if it hurries up. You can see that it's running the DLL, and the DLL's been templated using ARB, so it's got the right configuration, and it's going into development. So this is where I ask for any questions.
So is it actually, I mean, the one thing that confuses me about unit testing is to what degree you go to. So is it practical when you're developing to capture every part of a schema, so every column, every data type, for example, every foreign key, every constraint, just in case it changes. Depend on how much time you have.
It goes to how much documentation you want from it. Right. So, say if you're going to hand it over to somebody else, they can understand without going into the source code based on the test. It also depends on, are you picking up any legacy work here? You should really start, if you're writing something from scratch, to start with a test from scratch. Build stuff up as you go along, as you need it.
So you recommend every schema needs?
Only new development.
On new development. Yeah. Any new development you would capture schema.
I would capture, yes.
Within your unit test.
Yes. Because if there was a reason why you need it as a bit, not null. Yeah. So if somebody tries to change the source code, so it is null. I don't know why you would want a bit that is null, but they can refer to the test and they can say it needs to be not null because.
Do you find when you're working with other development teams, they understand that you need to put time on the end of or at the beginning, I should say, your development work to build up a unit test? And in fact, it does take a lot longer to do. And do other teams understand that?
Yeah. So you can spend the majority of your development writing tests.
Yeah. Sure.
And if REST tests are good if they're written well. So. You're only as good as your test, like people say.
Yeah, I think majority feature are quite good. Yeah, the only thing is just that assertion is then have to hard linked with the manually count index. Yeah. It's quite brutal.
It's tedious, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. If there's any other testing framework can do the assertion better.
That doesn't require deployment into a database. No. Or without writing a C# equivalent to that. There isn't any on the market. So there are other testing frameworks. All of them require you to deploy something in your CI box. And they're quite brutal what they do under the hood as well.
Is there any way you can, so for instance, it was linking conditions with result sets,
yes.
And those result sets were numbered, which we all recognise as being a bit problematic. Is there any way you can write some code under the hood that, for instance, links up indexes with names or,
Possibly, if you know C#. Yeah. Because
what
it does is, I can get right into the guts of it. It writes a C# class under the hood.
Yeah. So if you know C#, you might actually be able to play with that a bit to make it.
The SQL itself is stored in a resource file. So the resource file contains the actual SQL for which condition it points to.
I think, however, though.
But I wouldn't want to start messing about with stuff like that.
This is built for SQL Server development.
Yeah, exactly.
Necessarily, there being a prerequisite of them knowing C#.
Yeah, and that's important.
Yeah. But if it was easy enough to do, like if it was just a case of copy and paste and change the name, easy enough to pick up on.
You can do all sorts.
If somebody else created a template for you, then it might be easy for you to then
so that's in the future. That's future development, and I think Microsoft are committed into doing it. So the class itself can be modified. You remember I told you about transactions between setup and teardown aren't possible. They are possible, really, if you was to put transaction scope here. You can then roll or dispose the transaction and it won't write anything to the database. It'll just roll it all back.
So just put all in one test though, mightn't it?
Yeah, may as well, yeah. So it is possible.
Yeah.
There are ways around it. What else can I show you? So anything that can be run via SQL can be tested. So that's execution of SSIS. You know, you can test operating system level functions like make directory exists. You can start and stop services and stuff. Whatever you can do with SQL, you can do in a test. So that's it.
Cool.
Anybody, any other questions?
Yeah, talking about further development from Microsoft.
Yeah.
Do they have a pipeline, for want of a better word?
There is. If you have a look at the SSDT Connect page, you'd be able to see the new and oncoming bug fixes, features, feature requests. Unit testing is big at the minute.
So if we were putting a feature request for that,
it'll get voted. We'll all vote it up, yeah? We'll all vote it up. And I think transactions is a big one as well. I think if you can get the session shared, I think, you know, it's a win. It may lock your database, but
so you're having to tear it all down at the end.
Exactly. So when we unit testing, I'll use hotel distribution for an example. We wrote some stored procedures that build the data for us. So we have a separate project where we invoke to Sprock to create a bunch of hotels, create a bunch of users, and throughout the test we select them out. So if you have a look at the hotel get right stuff, so you can see in the pre-tests, we'll come along, we'll create a test user, a hotel, a room, add some allocation, and you can see that I'm adding it to a global table here. Okay, that global table is used within the test script, so I can extract the hotel ID and anything else in there I can pull out. I'm then hitting the stored procedure here, populating another table variable, but I'm joining back onto it here to make sure that the price is right, the room's right, and the hotel, and the test conditions is a non-empty result set because I've got the predicate set here. You know.
Right. Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
So effectively, your scalar conditions are actually comparing to real values is happening within the select.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Yeah.
So horses for courses. You know, say if you're hitting a scalar function, it makes sense to use a scalar test condition. I'll run all these just to make sure they work. So before we start any development within any project, we make sure that our tests pass.